Good morning, everyone. Before I introduce Mary, I want to recognize some of our students since we have so many students here. One of the things we do at Seidman in our curriculum is we try to integrate experiential learning into the curriculum, both in class and outside the class as much as possible. Experiential learning covers a broad base of activities, internships being one, project-based learning where students do projects for companies as part of their classes, consulting projects where they go out and work with companies. And then we have also a number of different competitions in many of our disciplines that students compete in regionally as well as nationally. And those are the students who I would like to recognize today. So students, some of you are here. I don't know if you know I'm doing this, but when I call your name, would you please stand up? So here are some of the accomplishments of our students. Gregory Binder, Jaycon Reeds, and Jody Hicks, are you here? Beta Alpha Psi Regional Conference for Best Practices, that is in accounting. Thank you. Josiah Brown and Nicholas Telasky for the Certified Financial Analyst Challenge. Wow. They probably are studying it so late, close to the end of the semester. Tracy Corder-Quillen for the North American Case Research Association. That came with a $6,000 prize shared among 4 students. And then Sydney Ecker, the Family Enterprise Case. Which was held in Vermont, and she came in with her team, 2nd place in a worldwide competition.
Wow. That's impressive. Very good.
Did I miss, now there are a lot of students here, did I miss any other students that competed in any of the case competitions? Don't be shy. That's just a few. We have a number of other case competitions, and our students always do well, and even when they don't win, the experience they get is far beyond anything we can do just sitting in a classroom. And so we understand the importance of integrating as much experiential learning and real-world experience for our students, so when they get out to work with many of your companies, they are already part way to starting their career and understanding what it means to work. And we thank you for your support in doing that. So now on to Mary. I met Mary early on when I started here a couple of years ago. And the thing I remember most from first meeting her and what continues is no matter what we talk about, she always pushes me to think outside the norm of how I might be thinking about a specific situation. She asks questions, why? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And that kind of innovation and creativity and thinking, I think has really helped us, having her as a trustee member, having her as a participant in a lot of what we're doing. So it's been very beneficial to me as a relatively new person in Michigan, as well as in Grand Rapids and in Detroit. Mary has both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Bachelor's from Grand Valley, master's from Eastern, and we're okay with that since she lives on the other side of the state. She has 16 years of reporting and management experience at daily newspapers before joining Crain's Detroit Business in 1989, and currently serves as the Vice President Group Publisher for Crain's Detroit, supervising Crain's Cleveland business in addition to the Detroit activities. She is a trustee of the Skillman Foundation in Detroit and a trustee of the board here at Grand Valley State University. She's active in many Detroit area business and civic organizations, including several that focus on at-risk girls. You'll start to see a trend in her passions and interests. And she was the first woman to be elected president of the historic Detroit Athletic Club in Detroit. That's a big thing. That's a really big thing. So please join me in welcoming Mary.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here today in this beautiful facility, which is nothing like any of the buildings that I remember going to Grand Valley in the 1970s. I think the land acquisition was in play for some of the downtown campus, but when I was at Grand Valley in the 70s, the Lanthorn, where I was the editor for a year, was in a farmhouse, which I think is a parking lot now, but I'm not sure. But it was a very different campus back then. So it's wonderful to come back and actually have a chance. I hope I get to talk to some students after the presentation. And the title, how many people know this iconic little figure here? That's the Hush Puppy logo, right? And so you wonder, oh my God, is she going to be talking about footwear? And even though at my age, I do know the importance of solid arch support. And for the younger people in the room, let me recommend that you start paying attention to solid arch support now, and it will save you a lot of travails later. But actually, my appreciation for this Grand Rapids area icon, Wolverine Worldwide, this is a global giant in footwear, founded in 1883. It really starts at the top. And I know that Blake Kruger, who's the CEO, has spoken in this series before, but I'm not sure he talked about what I think is really impressive about the company. Wolverine Worldwide is on the honor roll among Michigan's top public 100 companies. In 2015, women held more than 20% of the seats on the company's board of directors. 27% to be precise, with 3 women directors, one of them African American. Let's see, I've got to point this somewhere, huh? Somebody's got to tell me how to change the slide. Yes, okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. So, for the first time, Inform, I think Inform has a strong chapter in the Grand Rapids area. It's a statewide women's advocacy, professional women's organization. Since 2003, every 2 years, they've been doing research with a partner, an academic partner. The most recent survey last year, they did the research with Wayne State University, and they look at the boards of directors of all the publicly traded companies in Michigan, and among the Fortune 500 firms, the very biggest firms, 100% for the very first time since 2003 in this survey, every 2 years, have at least one woman director. And of course, in the case of Wolverine Worldwide, they are at 27%. So let me tell you about a couple of other companies, a few other companies in West Michigan. And I think this is really important because as I look at the West Michigan landscape, I don't see a lot of women CEOs. There are some, but the publicly traded companies have embraced diversity at the very highest level because remember, the board of directors sets policy and they hire and fire the CEO. That is part of their job. Steelcase has 3 women, 27% of their board. Herman Miller, 4 women, 36% of the board. Spartan-Nash, the grocery giant, 3 women, 27%. Kellogg Company, 5 women, 38%. And Stryker, 2 women, 22%. So all of these statistics come from this 2015 report that I mentioned. But the truth is that actually all the good news about that, those are the companies that are kind of the outliers. Because if you look historically over the recent history of these Michigan companies, you'll see that actually it's kind of flatlined in 2015. You can see these numbers in terms of where the percentage of women directors actually dropped to 11.5% overall. The number of the percentage of women executive officers kind of leveled out. Top compensated officers, it actually dropped. And so you can see the numbers for yourself. So only 18 of the 100 companies, top companies in publicly traded companies in Michigan can boast that 20% of their directors are women. 29 of those companies, of the 100, drag the overall percentage down because this group, 000, have no women at all. And this is an interesting list as well because it has companies like Gentex, huge auto supplier, Mercantile Bank, Sturgis Bank Corp., and a handful of technology and healthcare or biomed kinds of companies. So why does this matter? Well, why does it matter if women are represented on corporate boards? Well, there's company performance for one. Now, I don't know for the students in the room, when you're looking at, you're taking courses and that touch on corporate governance or publicly traded companies or company performance and the kinds of measures that you would look at to see how well a company performs. But studies show that companies with at least one woman director outperform companies with none. And I invite you and encourage you to take a look at that because there's a body of work on this very topic. Credit Suisse analyzed more than 2,300 companies globally over the 6 years ending December 2011, and they looked at their average share prices over that time, and the boards that had a diversity at the top, the companies that had the diversity on their boards, fared better and had higher share prices overall. Catalyst is a New York-based nonprofit that focuses on women leadership in corporate America. They did a study in 2015 that said that Fortune 500 companies with the highest percentage of women directors had significantly higher performance financially. In fact, Catalyst concluded that 3 women directors is the magic number. So one, you're kind of still an oddity. You're kind of like the new kid on the block. You're on the board. But once you get 3, there's a comfort level. The people can find their voice, and it's more comfortable because they're not so unusual. They're not a sole female on the board. So the 3 or more women director companies performed on the average 53% better in return on equity, 42% better on return on sales, and 66% better on return on capital investment. So this is a very interesting study. Again, you can find it online. Catalyst chalks it up to women bringing a diversity of thought, more independence, and maybe even a little more innovation. Is that true? Well, the research seems to suggest it might be. And I kind of think in our own lives here in Michigan, I can only speak from my own experience and my experience at the Detroit Athletic Club, becoming a member of that board before I became president. I will never forget the day that the guys in the room were planning capital expenses, and they were planning a major investment in physical plant. They were going to remodel this entire floor, actually 2 floors. And they were making decisions about a room that is dear to my heart, which is the women's locker room. And I listened to these guys talk about chopping out this part and chopping out that part because they needed another meeting room and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I have just one question. Gentlemen, has anyone ever seen the women's locker room, the current women's locker room? None of them had, of course. So I asked our director, do you think on a Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock we'd be able to bring the boys through? And once they actually saw for themselves how awful the facility was, that they didn't have, I got my space back, and the meeting room went somewhere else. But it was just, if I hadn't been at the table, that voice would never have been heard. That's just a small example. Let's use a big example. You heard about the Flint water crisis. Now, this is my own personal theory. This is not, I don't have any research to back it up. But when I think about the Snyder administration, and you read these emails, and you think about the culture of the cabinet level officers that report directly to the governor and the lack of information that went up the food chain, I believe in my heart of hearts that if Maura Corrigan, who was a state Supreme Court justice and then became the head of the Department of Human Services, if she had not retired in 2014 and left that administration, I think a very strong and comfortable voice would have been at that table telling those guys, are you crazy? Are you nuts? You have to deal with this issue, and let's really get to the bottom of it. Children's lives are at stake. Maura is a very passionate advocate for children, and there is no doubt in my mind that were she at those tables in early 2015, late 2014, I think that maybe we wouldn't have had this groupthink that is so apparent when you read the emails that have been released. So that's just two examples, and you might ask if with the research and with our own real-life examples, why would so many public companies still lag in terms of diversity at the top? Well, I think for starters, it starts with the job description of boards of directors. You know, what people at publicly traded companies had often looked for is a retired CEO, someone who has sat in the CEO's chair and has that great experience and can bring that experience to the company as a director. So if you look at boards, and I've looked at a lot of them, you kind of see a lot of retired executives, and I kind of think they got into those spots in part because they knew someone. If there were women on the boards, perhaps a CFO at a large public company or a college president or an academic with specific expertise, those are the kinds of women that traditionally you have found on corporate boards. Now, I think that there's a lot of reasons why this comfort level, this idea that you ask a friend, someone you know who's on, say it's company, let's say it's a bank board, and the bank board is looking for a new director. They'll talk to another friend who's on a board at another place and say, hey, Joe, can you recommend somebody who can chair an audit committee? And it's kind of this person-to-person referral kinds of things that leads to a lot of board, a lot of invitations to serve on publicly traded boards. At the very highest level, some of the largest companies, they employ a search firm to help them find the right person, and they're employing them more and more to find skilled women for the open slots on their boards. So the question is really, whose job is it to find diversity at the board? Is it the CEO? Well, the CEO kind of reports to the board. So would it be the chairman of the board? Would it be the chair of the nominating committee? Heidrick & Struggles is a very well-known search firm, and they did a recent survey of directors across a lot of different companies, different industries, different sizes. And it was interesting because women directors who were surveyed said that they thought it was the board leadership, the board chair and the nominating committee chair that should serve as change agents. But the majority of men who were directors on these company boards said it was a pipeline issue. I think many women in the room have heard that before, right? We've heard the pipeline. It's always the pipeline issue, that if more women were in the pipeline, they would naturally rise to the top and be tapped more for director slots on boards. There just aren't enough women CEOs, so obviously there aren't enough women on boards. But my opinion, again, as companies face increasingly complex issues, regulatory compliance, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, they could be missing the boat by overlooking women with deep experience in those fields, maybe not CEO, but maybe in charge of a division of a company that's pretty darn big and could actually help a company with their expertise. My guess is that a 75-year-old retired CEO has their idea of tech support is asking their grandchildren for help with their iPad. The companies need this kind of expertise in cybersecurity and other things, and they can actually find that in many, many women, even in our own state. Another opportunity for increasing diversity comes from institutional investors who use their clout as shareholders. Now, I have some stock. I'm not the wealthiest person on the block, but this is, again, for the students in the room. I started saving very young, and I do own some stock directly, and I love getting those proxies when in the spring when it's annual meeting time, and I look at the directors, and I look at their qualifications, and to me, it always says Old Boy Network, and so what I do is I reject all nominees, and I put a little note and say, where are the women candidates? And I send it back, and of course, I never hear anything from anybody. But I have a friend, and she has a little more clout than I do. She runs the Employee Retiree Healthcare Trust that was created by Detroit's 3 automakers and the UAW in 2007. She has an endowment of $66 billion. and that is invested in many stocks. So she and her chief investment officer have been quietly writing companies that they have investments in and saying, "Dear Chairman so-and-so, we have noticed, we own X number of shares, and we have noticed that the diversity at your board is a little lacking, and we recommend that you adopt as a principle for your governance committee a commitment to diversity at the board level." And they have quietly been doing this. They have gotten 4 women on company boards through this process, and it's just 2 years in. That's significant change. One of the companies that they quietly reached out to is Lear Corp, which recently announced, that's one of the largest auto suppliers in the world. And they recently announced they had nominated a second woman, or appointed a second woman to its board. Mary Lou Jepson is the kind of person that I mentioned before. Might not be a CEO, but look at her, this is her vita. She's executive director of engineering at Facebook and head of its virtual reality unit. She has Silicon Valley cred and the technical expertise. She personally holds 100 patents. And I think Lear looked at her and thought, more and more there's this issue of the connected car, and will Detroit be the place for the connected car? Is that going to be the epicenter, or is it going to be Silicon Valley? So Lear very smartly reached out to Silicon Valley and found this woman with this incredible expertise to bring to Detroit, Michigan, and be able to add that to their board. Now, she wasn't a CEO, and she's 51 years old, so that kind of makes it a different kind of place. Michigan, just running through a couple more statistics, we actually are doing a little bit better in terms of women across the board. Now, I mentioned that all publicly traded companies, it's 11.5%, but when you look at the very biggest, we're at 21% versus 19%. And I think it's because of companies like General Motors. Funny how having a woman CEO kind of influences the selection process, I guess, because they're at 42% of their board is female now. And so we actually, I think because of GM and the furniture companies on this side of the state and companies like Wolverine Worldwide, we have a better showing than the national showing in terms of the top Fortune 500 companies. So I talked about Lear and how they found their latest woman for their board. There's General Motors at 42% with five women on their board. I thought it was 44, but it's 42. There's another way, too, and that is activist shareholders. This is Carl Icahn, who we read a lot about in business, right? I mean, he's always investing in a company that he thinks is undervalued and then tries to either break it up and increase shareholder value that way, or do some other kinds of ways so he can make more money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when he nominated 42 people, because what you do when you make a big stake, when you buy a big stake in a company, you want to make sure your view, if you have enough clout, your view is present on that board of directors. So you're always asking for director slots if you have a significant amount of shares. So he's nominated 42 people for 94 board seats over the past 5 years. Some of them were nominated for more than one seat. None were women. And I really have a problem trying to think that Carl Icahn, with all the resources he has, can't find women who are smart enough to serve on a corporate board of a company that he would invest in. These companies included Herbalife and eBay. And I do think there's probably women who could serve on those boards. So it's no wonder, given this, and the other numbers I mentioned earlier, that some people believe the landscape in the United States won't change unless regulators adopt some kind of quota system like they have in Europe, in some European countries. In Germany, for example, companies as of this year need at least 30% of their supervisory board members to be female. In 2014, women held 22% of these non-executive slots on the board. And if the companies fail to recruit enough women, the companies will be barred from giving vacant seats to men. So that's their quid pro quo. It's a requirement, it's a law. Companies have to follow these new rules. or pay the price and have smaller boards. Now, I don't like quotas, and I don't like them for one simple reason. How would you like to be viewed if you had a slot, if I had a slot on the board? I really have no interest in being on that board when I would be viewed by my peers and I would be heard by my peers as, well, she's the token. She's here because, not because of her skills, but because we were forced to basically add a female to the board. And back to that Heidrick and Struggles survey of directors that I mentioned, it's interesting. Half of the female respondents, 51%, agreed that quotas could make a big difference and they would be an effective tool. 25% of the men agreed that quotas would be good. But only 39% of the women directors personally supported quotas. And I think that the number was lower for the very reason I just said. They don't want to be viewed as having the seat because you're filling some government requirement. So for effective change, we're going to need guys leading the companies who have seen diversity works. They have to be part of the process of bringing more of their peers along. And that's the case at some of the companies that I mentioned earlier in my remarks, the Michigan companies. We're going to need people like Warren Buffett, who started a U.S. version of the 20-plus club. This actually is called the 30% club. He founded it a couple of years ago in the United States. It's modeled on something in the U.K. Peter Brower, the chairman of Bloomberg, was a founding chair. And in creating the chapter in 2013, and this was like a who's who of CEOs in the United States, Brower said that adding more diversity would help boards avoid groupthink. Maybe that's why companies with more women tend to perform better. So we at Cranes, to bring this back home, think we may be working on an answer to help Michigan companies. We're working with partners like Dean Lawson here at the Seidman College and with the Michigan Women's Commission. I'm so happy that Kathy Vogelsang from the Michigan Women's Commission and the Van Andel Institute, her day job, is here this morning. We've been talking about this for some time, and what we think we would like to do is create a confidential and quiet diplomatic resource for companies, particularly those companies that are listed that have 0 women on their boards. And we are hiring a part-time executive search contractor to help us go through data that Crane already collects on women of accomplishment in the state of Michigan. And the companies, the smaller companies that probably don't want to pay the big bucks for a search firm, they're also very concerned about the fit and collegiality on their board. We think that we have a model that could be used where a company could tap our database using our contract researcher and find the qualified women and the skill sets that they need for their boards. Now, to get this thing off the ground, which we're publicly launching in June of this year, I thought it was important to find men who are in senior positions who understand the diversity challenge and would serve as advisors to this whole process and allow their names to be on the letterhead. So when we're connecting with some of these executives around the state, they see Jim Hackett's name because he's one of our advisors. Or Matt Simoncini, the CEO of Lear, he's one of our advisors. He's seen the light, he's listened, he's added to his board, and he is very excited about the opportunities of using the resources that we have in our own backyard, these fabulous women in the state of Michigan. There are companies on that list with 0 women who are in the technology field, and it strikes me as so amazing knowing someone like I do, Terry Takai. Now, this is just an example of one of the fabulous women in Michigan. She was the CIO. She ran all of the computer and IT technology for the state of Michigan under Jennifer Granholm, for the state of California under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. But most importantly, she was the CIO for the U.S. Department of Defense. And now she's back in Michigan, and I think she could be tapped for a board position, and yet no one has reached out to her for something like that. She's not a CIO, but she was running IT for the Pentagon with all the cybersecurity issues that would involve. And my guess is she would add a little value to a company struggling with similar issues. Jim Hackett told me that big companies know their customers want to see diversity, and that is a driving reason for why a company like Steelcase would become more diverse. There are the governance issues, the management issues, the groupthink issues as well. And all of that leads me back to Wolverine Worldwide, which may have started with that Hush Puppies brand, but is now a global leader in all kinds of brands of footwear. The company has the consumer in mind, so it makes sense that they would recruit directors who are like their consumers, many of whom are female. Joan Parker may have been the first female director of the company. She was a senior partner with J. Walter Thompson, the big ad agency, and helped bring a consumer focus to the Wolverine board. There are 3 women currently serving on the Wolverine board. All 3 have a consumer focus. 2 of the 3 have a consumer focus. Gina Boswell is general manager of Unilever in the UK and Ireland, so she has consumer focus and global experience. Brenda Lauterbach is retired president of wholesale and retail group of Nine West, which is a major women's apparel retailer. She's also African American. And Roxanne DeVol has another experience, website security. She's senior VP and general manager of website security for Symantec Corporation. Now, none of those women were CEOs. All of those women have very specific and deep skill sets. So how do we influence these companies to look at diversity as an imperative? I think I've mentioned it takes a lot of people to make this happen. We have to lean in a little bit, to use Sheryl Sandberg's phrase. We need the men at the top of the companies that have the women, the most diverse boards. We need stockholders to say this is important to them. We need consumers who ask themselves when they're buying products, if they know what they know about the company whose products they're purchasing. And for the students in the room, I talk to a lot of people who are hiring, and it's really interesting to see what some of the trends are in hiring, because talent is the biggest headache for many, many companies. And a lot of companies are adopting green policies and other kinds of policies because guess what? It's students who are applying for jobs who ask questions about what is their corporate responsibility policy, what is their green policy, what are some of the green practices that the company practices. I think it'd be interesting for young talent to add another question to the list. Who actually governs this place? What is your board of directors like? Who's on your board? How long have they been on the board? And if you started asking questions like that, you might actually be surprised to see how the responses are from these companies. I don't think it'll cost you a job. I think it'll actually impress people that you're curious, besides the CEO and how long the CEO or the president has been in place. If it's a privately held company, do you have a board, or is it just the family that's running it? If it's a publicly traded company, can I see your list of board of directors? That you can go online and find that out. But I think if we all start making this something that matters, we start measuring, like Inform has done, but then we take that data and we actually act on it to try and move the needle, not in a way to embarrass companies, but quietly, diplomatically offering a resource like a Michigan Women's Directory and the opportunity to use it at a nominal cost. It's not going to break the bank. Then I think we might actually see in the next Inform report, instead of 11.5% women directors at publicly traded companies in the state of Michigan, we might even reach the Warren Buffett goal of 30%. Thank you. Questions or no? And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. It doesn't have to be about women on boards. It could be about Detroit or my favorite professor or just about anything. So any questions from the group? Extra credit? Yes.
Well, I wonder if you might comment on a review of this one book that this woman, I can't remember her name, recently wrote. The review was in the Wall Street Journal, and she was on the same subject as you with regard to more women in the marketplace. And she was talking about putting structures in place, both in the hiring process and elsewhere, that would be more gender neutral. And one example, so that just pure talent would rise. And one example she gave is that the symphony orchestras across the United States, up until the year 2000, were predominantly only 5 to 7% were females in those professional orchestras. And around the beginning of 2000, these orchestras started instituting a new way of hiring people, auditioning behind a curtain. You didn't know if they were male, female, tall, or short. And that presently there are approximately 40% women in symphonies across the United States. So I wonder if you might comment on her idea of trying to set up gender-neutral questions and so forth in the application process so that talent will emerge, and out of that pool, naturally, more women would be hired.
I don't know that book specifically, and my familiarity with the blind audition process in orchestras is one of the other major issues is racial diversity in orchestras. It's not just female, but, and I know that that's been a problem, or not a problem, but it's been something that the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, for example, has focused on, because here you are in the city of Detroit, and if people come to the concerts and they don't see anyone who looks like them, it makes it feel like it's an effete thing, and it's not really for me, it's not really for us. So I think I'd love to see, I'll try and look up that book because that sounds very interesting. I don't have enough big corporation experience to know how people are, how the process works to find talent. I would imagine, though, one of the things that I think has happened is as we batch people, as everything becomes online and you have search words for certain things, there's a lot of people who are left on the cutting room floor that would make excellent, excellent candidates. And I don't know if HR systems have figured that out. That's the part that drives me crazy, because when we're trying to hire, I have a small operation in Detroit. I mean, our company is like 1,000 people, but my little Cranes Detroit and Cranes Cleveland, we have centralized financial billing and all that kind of stuff. So my core little group is not that large. And what I find is the systems that are used for submitting resumes, there are people that I find out about from a personal contact. Someone says to me, have you seen the resume of so-and-so? This person would be very good. It's not in the top group that has filtered up. And I've talked to other people about that as well. That's an issue across the board. I can't really speak to gender neutral because I don't understand how the big companies operate in general in terms of that. I just know that what I've seen is that when people are promoted, that it tends to be, we are humans. We look for mini-me's. You know, we look for people who are like ourselves. And I think that's where a lot of attention is going in companies, is to create more diverse teams, because more diverse teams actually perform better in business. So once you're hired, then being part of that diverse team and making sure that managers are trained in whatever the Strength Finder or whatever the key tool of the day is. Strength Finder, I think, is Gallup. I think that that's used by a lot of companies in helping to create the teams and helping the managers build their teams so they're not just clones of the manager. I don't know if that helps. Any other questions? Yes. What suggestions do I have for women entering a field that is a career in an old boys world? Well, start reading the sports section. Actually, those were words of advice given to me when I went into management. I was an assistant city editor at the Grand Rapids Press, and I'll never forget, I don't know if Rex Larson is still around here, but Anna Moore Butzner, who was a photographer, said, Mayor, you got to start reading the sports section. She was right, because every conversation was about sports. So I know that sounds crazy, but that is one tip. And I think, marketing actually, I think is becoming more and more female. I don't see marketing as an old boys club. What I see more as an old boys club are the higher senior level positions in advertising. And advertising is a field that is being turned upside down because of digital and because of all these different things. People have so many channels now for all their marketing messages and all these different audiences they're trying to meet, that the old time advertising has become multinational, huge companies with all these different divisions. And if you've been reading about advertising lately, there have been some tremendous missteps by high-level men running companies who might be a little insensitive on things having to do with gender, race, and some other things. So a guy just lost his job in Detroit at a huge agency because a satellite office did a very ethnically insensitive contest, and it went viral. And this guy didn't handle it quickly enough. He's out the door. In New York, there's another company, I can't remember the name of the advertising agency. Again, jokes, things like that, out the door. But the key is, and a woman replaced him, by the way. But advertising is still pretty much not Mad Men, but it's not too far. So it's the advertising agencies that need to change a lot more. But I think in marketing positions, particularly in corporate marketing, it's less of a male domain than it used to be. And so I think that's a really good field to be in. And I'd love to talk to you about it after this, because I want to know where you're from and where you want to go. Okay? Okay. Yes?
You speak a lot about America and Michigan in terms of the seats on the boards. You reference Germany, and the quote is there. What about the rest of the world in public companies where there are a board structure? How does America compare and contrast to other nations, regions within the world?
I don't know. I really don't know. So I'm not going to try and pretend that I do. But I do know that this quota thing started with Scandinavian companies, Scandinavian countries. And Germany, I was really surprised. They have a different kind of a board system. I'm sure there's somebody who teaches business in this room who could answer your question. Is there a professor who might know a little bit more than I do about corporate governance in other countries with publicly traded companies? Anybody? Yes. So India is another country that has quotas or would offer fines, levy fines on companies if there are not enough women. I was surprised to see Germany move that way, but because I guess I just keep having the image in mind when the merger of equals with Chrysler way back in the day with the German company, and it was celebrated with the new Jürgen Schremp, I believe his name was, and the book that was written about the merger of equals. And there was the party to celebrate the merger going through, acquisition really, and he left the room with his secretary over his shoulder after much drinking and celebrating, and I thought, yeah, okay, Germany, all right. If I were a woman working at Chrysler, I'd be a little anxious right now. So that was my image of senior leadership at a German company, but I realized that was many years ago. Any other questions? I'm sorry I can't answer that one. Anything else? One more? All right. Hey, thank you very much.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mary, for that insight. A couple things. I love numbers, and numbers do tell stories. And Mary was able to take a significant set of data and weave the story. And I think we learned an awful lot through that experience. I know that Ambassador Secchi and Joan would appreciate the message, too. And so I'm
He's
thrilled
got a woman on his board, Universal, so that's good.
So I, again, pleased that you all could be here. Just as an aside, I've been here now 10 years, and I've had 7 board chairs, 6 of which have been women. And we're a public institution, in fact, $1.2 billion in assets. But I've learned so much by interacting with our board chairs, because I think, one, they made me a better president, and secondly, they've made, in general, the decisions on a policy and strategic level to make the university even better as well. So just a perspective, a personal perspective on engaging with boards and board leadership with the diversity that's necessary to make good strategic decisions as we look ahead. And I think the university is represented because of the diversity that we've had on our board through the years. So just a little anecdote. And the other point of reference is Mary, back now almost 10 years ago, was my first commencement speaker as president. And we were able to hear from her then and the perspective she had with our soon-to-be graduates and all those that were assembled here in Grand Rapids. And we were afforded her an honorary degree at the time as well. So pleased with her leadership continuing as a representative of our over 100,000 alums on the board, but also a note of her recognition back just a few years ago now as Dr. Kramer. So with that, I'm going to offer a couple of gifts, but let's recognize Mary again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
First is from the Seaman College of Business. On behalf of the Peter Secchi Breakfast Lecture Series, the college will make a contribution of a bio-sand water filter in your name to pure water for the world of the world in Honduras. It's hosted by Cascade Engineering, Native Energy, in honor of Mary Kramer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And you always got to leave events at Grand Valley with representation. And so here is on behalf of all of us here at the university, in particular at the college, the Seaman College, and the students and the faculty and staff, please take
Thank
this
you.
and continue to represent us well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So with that, again, we're concluded for the day, but come back again for one of these breakfast lectures and series. We learned so much together. So thank you. Enjoy your spring.